This is a Vauxhall Corsa 2005. We're going to be installing the Sony BT3900 Bluetooth unit. Now, there's one thing we need to take note of on this stereo is the model number, which you will see printed usually in the corner. We need to know if it's 2, 3 or 4 digit. The way to tell is the numbers inside the model number. This one is a CD30, so it's 2 digit, it's 2 numbers. The CD300 would be a 3 digit and the CD3000 would be a 4 digit. The 3 and the 4 digit require the AutoLeads PC2044, which is ISO to ISO. This swaps the ignition and the live. If it's the 2 digit, we require the PC2854, which is the large quad lock connector, which drops it down to ISO. It has an ignition fly lead that we need to take off to an ignition source, and it also has the aerial adapter built in as well. The first thing we need to do when installing the stereo is we need to turn the stereo on, check that there are no CDs inside the CD player, and we need to make sure that all speakers are currently working and we can hear both FM and AM.
I stopped shoplifting and...
Right, that's correct. So now we can go to remove the stereo. To remove the stereo, we need to use the AutoLeads doubled in ISO release keys. They slot in the side of the stereo around about 1 centimetre. Once pushed in, you'll feel them click into the mechanism. Don't force them in too far, as you will jam up the mechanism and create more problems. Once they're inserted, pull it outwards slightly and pull the stereo towards you. With this being the 2 digit, it's quad lock, so you need to press the tabs on either side of the lever and lift the lever up to remove the quad lock connector. And the aerial is a Fascia connection which has a tab on the bottom to press, which will allow us to release it. But the first thing we need to do to install the stereo is remove the original cage. At the very back of the cage you will find a T20 screwdriver with a screw. You'll need to use your T20 screwdriver to remove that. And right down the very back, undo your screw. And we can then put that to one side. And if we put the wire in inside, out of the way gently, we can lift up the various different parts of the cage. You may need to use a flathead screwdriver to just help pop down the panel at the top. Now we can gently work the cage out without trapping the wire in. The next thing we need to do is to plug in our PC2854. You can cut off the orange wire, as this is illumination and we didn't need this one. So slot the two together gently, making sure that none of the pins get knocked out or pushed out whilst we're connecting it. And plug in the aerial adapter. That is now almost ready to be plugged straight into a stereo. We now need to run an ignition source. Unfortunately on this vehicle, the only local ignition source is from the cigarette lighter socket itself. So we're going to need to attach to that using some crimp connections and a fuse, so we do not cause any problems with the factory electrics. To get to it, the first thing we need to do is undo the T20 screwdriver down the side here. That will then allow us to pull the panel forwards far enough to be able to feed the cable to the cigarette lighter socket itself. To remove the cigarette light socket, pull it down, pop your thumb in and hold on to it. Well, this is on a couple of little clips either side. Pop that to one side. We can now feed the red cable down the side of the dashboard and out just behind the centre console. And then from there, we can pop it up and behind the centre console panel from the screw we've removed. And we can then put it up and into the piece here. Once in, just give it a quick pull, just make sure we're not snagged on anything at all behind the panels. We can now put the screw back in to hold the panel back in place. Now I need to make the connection to the cigarette lighter. On the Vauxhalls, the brown is the earth and the black is the ignition. But always double check this with your multimeter set on voltage and 20 volts DC. if we cut the connection in half, strip the cable back so that we have something to grip to. Twist and fold over the piece that's closest to the connector, that's doubled over. Now, what we need to do is to cut ourselves about 2 inches of cable off of the ignition wire. Strip the cabling back. Wrap one piece around the ignition wire for the cigarette lighter socket. Trim down if it's a little bit too long. We can now crimp one half of the butt connector onto the first part of the cable. Now insert the second half of the cable and connect the butt connector back together, repairing the wiring loom. We now have a bare end that we can put a shrouded female spade terminal onto, that we can then insert a fuse into. You must always have a fuse, as anything between here and here is going to be a smaller cable, so it will not be protected. So we always have the fuse in line, so that it protects the rest of the cable where any kind of accidents can happen. That's now protected the cable that we've just installed for the ignition, so if anything does happen to that, it will not affect the cigarette lighter socket or any of the wiring inside the vehicle. We can now tape and tidy everything up. We can reconnect the cigarette lighter socket and to push this back in, just literally put it on the side and just push gently on the left and the right to lock it back into place. The next thing we need to do is install the Autoleads FP1900 in silver for this vehicle, as it has a silver dashboard. It does also come in black. This one just simply pops in with 5 pressure clips. So be very gentle just to push in. Put the bottom piece in first, and then we can gently put the top piece in. You have to be very careful with this, as those clips can break very, very easily. So just be very gentle whilst pushing this in. That's now ready for the cage to be inserted. So pop the cage off of the stereo. Now using a flathead again, we can put that into the cage and twist to then push up these tabs behind the plastic on the dashboard. So very gently insert this in and bend as many tabs around the back of the plastic fascia panel and the dashboard that you can to secure it in place. Now with the cage installed, we can now take the cabling from the back of the dashboard, being extremely careful not to catch yourself on any of the sharp edges of this cage. connection ready to go. We have our ISO connections. We need to plug the Sony wiring loom into this. Once you plug it in, check both sides of the connector to make sure none of the cables have been pushed out and everything is in nice and solid. Same on the power cable. Just make sure that nothing's come out. Now gently push this down behind the dashboard out of the way so it will not be caught by the stereo once the stereo is installed. Now we need to insert the cabling into the back of the stereo. And insert the aerial connection. Now put the stereo in, don't push it all the way in, leave it half out for now because we need to run a test to make sure that the memory and everything stays and that it plays CDs okay. Nice and neutral. Turn the electrics on, turn the stereo itself on, turn the volume down slightly, and then seek through and store a few radio stations. Also check in medium wave. Turn the ignition off and leave it off for a few moments. Turn the ignition back on and check that all of our memory presets have saved.
Been doing the lunchtime things. I've made it really,
now push the stereo in gently. If there's any kind of force stopping you from pushing it in, you need to pull the stereo back outwards again and then move all the cabling out from behind, as we do not want to trap any of the cabling behind the stereo. The last piece to go on now is the outer trim, which just simply clips in. Now we have our Sony BT3900 Bluetooth unit installed into a Vauxhall Corsa 2005.